Live from the SABC's Auckland Park studios, welcome to this Tuesday edition of the Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvogo, and here's what we have in store for you this evening.
There were no abstentions, 145 members voted against, and 204 members voted in support of the bill.
MPs reject the land expropriation without compensation constitutional amendment bill. Is the matter now dead in the water? Where to from here?
The social partners have agreed, that is organised business, labour and community, that to promote vaccinations and protect the country from lockdowns, workplaces should require employees to be vaccinated.
Deal or no deal? Amid confusing statements, tonight on the show we are bringing together senior representatives of government, business, labor and civil society to give clarity on mandatory vaccination. And finally, lifestyle audits for public servants. Are we on track for the February commencement? All that and more in tonight's episode of The Watchdog, which starts now. About 3 years in the making, members of parliament today rejected the land expropriation without compensation constitutional amendment bill. Bulelani Phillips sat through the debate this afternoon and brought us this report.
The Deputy Speaker.
A day built to make history, but it was not to be. The first proposed constitutional amendment since the adoption of the Constitution did not meet the threshold. The amendment needed 75% or 267 of votes to get the green light.
145 members voted against, and 204 members voted in support of the bill. As the required majority has not been obtained, in terms of Section 74, subsection 2 of the Constitution, the bill will not be read a second time.
Earlier, the ad hoc committee report on the proposed amendment was also opposed by the opposition.
We are not worried about those who are not supporting this bill, but we are quite confident that with or without them, the ANC is going to make the land available to the people.
Opposition parties have rejected the bill for different reasons. The EFF wants the land under state custodianship, which the ANC rejects, while the FF Plus and the DA insist the bill will erode property rights and scare off investors.
There is no need to amend Section 25, and this bill falls foul of the constitutional test.
The current bill makes meaningless provision for the state to be a custodian of certain land and does not define what this certain land is.
This bill, if adopted, will not change land ownership patterns. The process has been used as a political tool.
This will be unconstitutional and in direct conflict with the current provisions of Section 25(2)(b) and 25(3) of the South African Constitution.
It is not necessary to amend Section 25 of the Constitution, as the Constitution casing restitution of that act. It protects property rights and also recognizes the need for the restoration of rights to those who have been dispossessed of their land.
We are satisfied that our voice was heard and that the bill is in its current form. Does not put a time limit on the unfair dispossession of land.
We hold a strong and uncompromising view that passing this bill would be the biggest sellout action that this parliament would have done.
International property law, which binds South Africa, recognizes nil compensation. It is against this background that we support the wording on the bill of nil compensation. As it is practice, it will mean the same as expropriation without compensation.
From now, it's back to the drawing board to see if a revised bill can be brought back to the table. Bulelani Philip, SABC News, Parliament.
For some reflection, let's welcome a lawyer and author of 2 books on the land issue, and that's Advocate Tembeka Ngcukaitobi. Good evening, sir. Thank you very much for your time. I must say, for me, the person who takes the prize when it comes to reactions, you know, and to what he clearly saw, knew was coming, is Dr. Matole Motshekga, who is the chairperson of that committee, but of course also a senior member of the ANC. In case you didn't hear him when we're playing that package, says we are not worried about those who are not supporting this bill, but we are quite confident that with or without them, the ANC is going to make the land available to the people. And that brings the point, why then bother about this whole process that took 3 years, you know, only to tell us this on this very important day in the life of this process?
Good evening, Vuyo, and thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure always to come to your show. Yes, I mean, the amendment itself, I mean, the fact that it was defeated by the failure to obtain the necessary majority was not surprising, perhaps even predictable. The ANC always knew that it lacked the necessary numbers. It always knew what the position of the EFF was. It always knew what the position of the Democratic Alliance was, the 2 largest political parties in parliament. But there's something else that is to be noted. The ANC also always knew that the Constitution is not a stumbling block to land reform. And this is the critical concession that is made by Dr. Matole Motshekga, which then begins to ask the question, as you correctly identify, so why did we bother then for the last 4 years on a futile and unnecessary amendment?
And an expensive one at that.
Yes, and also emotionally taxing to many South Africans. Because on the one hand, the promise to African people that have no access to productive agricultural land is that suddenly, as soon as this bill is passed, they will have access to land. But on the other hand, the so-called quote-unquote threat to property owners that the land will be taken at one fell swoop without compensation. Both of those tensions were absolutely unnecessary, and the ANC was always aware of it. Why it embarked on a misguided amendment is extremely difficult to understand. We can only see this as a reflection of internal political dynamics within the ANC, and particularly as they played themselves out at the 2017 Nasrec conference. Other than that, there is no other rational explanation for passing a bill when they know that it's not necessary to put the land in the hands of the people. What is obviously questionable at this stage is the very commitment of the ANC to a land reform program, because they've diverted us from the constitutional path towards land redistribution, which is what they should have been following all along, into this temporary sideways of an amendment. The question to be asked of them is whether or not they are committed to a constitutional dispensation for land reform. The fact that they targeted, out of all sections they could have targeted in the Constitution, they targeted Section 25, whose primary goal is to transform property relations. That's the point of Section 25, is to transform property and land relations, is the most puzzling of all decisions they have made around the Constitution.
Now, Bulalani Philip ends that insert that he produced for us with the words, it's back to the drawing board to see if a revised bill can be brought back to the table. Do you see any possibility or likelihood of that happening? And I'm saying this on the back of the very things you've just said, what Matole Motshekga said, what their advisor, Matthew Sposa, said a long time ago, actually, and of course the stance or stances taken by the whole myriad of opposition parties. Is there a chance?
Yes, well, I was also one of the people invited to speak at a conference of the ANC held in 2018, in which the very point was made and debated that actually the framework is strong enough to fast-track a land reform program. I don't think that there is a possibility of a revised amendment, a constitutional revised amendment. What I think is likely is that they will dust off the expropriation bill that they have been debating, which is intended not to amend Section 25, but it is intended to replace the 1975 legislation. That's the most likely outcome. And within it, it contains a provision that is intended to enable the state to expropriate land in certain circumstances without the payment of compensation, or as the euphemism that is used, with nil compensation. So that's the most likely outcome, is that the focus is now going to turn to the Portfolio Committee on Public Works to bring that bill to Parliament, which they need only 51% to make sure that it passes through. But what should be happening instead is to unlock the administrative hurdles that are blocking land reform and to get the ANC genuinely committed to fixing the problems of poor people who need land. We have too many people who need access to housing, too many people who need access to productive agricultural land, too many people who are poor because they have no enough assets to make a living for themselves. Those do not need an amendment of any law. What they need is state action. They need practical support, and they need sometimes financial support from financial institutions like banks. If policies could be passed around those, there would be greater progress than the past wasted 4 years.
It's interesting, sir, because parties on both sides, or should I say at least the two main sides of this debate, but who for obviously different reasons, opposed the bill, raised the very same issue, that actually it is due to lack of, will, but also, time wasting, corruption, and a whole host of other things that the ANC has been unable to actually deliver on promises that it made. But what also caught my attention was how the ANC characterized the EFF's stance, saying it is the antithesis of economic freedom. I don't know whether it is just, politicking, or whether, there was any merit in such an argument, especially coming as it did from the ANC.
No, there is no merit in the argument of the ANC that the EFF's position is an antithesis of economic freedom. We must first ask ourselves, what is the EFF position? So what we know about the EFF position are two things on this issue of land. Firstly, we know that they were the political party that introduced the proposal of a constitutional amendment to Parliament in February 2018. Even though the ANC had adopted the resolution in December 2017, it had not yet found the political courage to introduce the item. So from that point of view, it's quite rich coming from the ANC to accuse the EFF of politic. The second thing we know from the EFF position is that its own position evolved over time into full-blown state custodianship. I am personally opposed to full-blown state custodianship over land, because I do not see how that brings the land into the hands and the control of the people who need it. And we must also remember, concepts of state custodianship have been applied before in South Africa. This was during the Victorian age, where the state was called crown land, simply one fell swoop put in the hands of the state, and at the time the state was the colonial state. Those same concepts carried throughout the apartheid era, particularly during the Bantustan era. So the state ownership model has always been accompanied by dispossession, because it weakens the actual rights that are held by ordinary poor people to the land, and it concentrates the ownership, the control, the direction, the productivity, the economies, the legal rights, concentrates all of those in the power of the state. Now that seems to be in conflict with the demands of the Freedom Charter, the land shall be shared among those who work it. In other words, it should be devolving downwards rather than concentrating in the hands of the state. So there are those concerns, but there is also a pragmatic and a practical concern. The state that we have become accustomed to, the South African state, it's very unlikely that anyone can persuade any rational thinking South African that the current state inherited by President Ramaphosa from the days of President Zuma, whether that current state is in fact capable of owning an asset such as land when we have so many challenges of corruption, of incompetence, of incapacity, and of general policy directionlessness. So if you look at those three elements, you come to the conclusion that the policy suggestion on state custodianship is not in the best interest of ordinary South Africans. What we need is the state to unlock the ownership patterns so that it devolves the land downwards rather than upwards.
And that's where we're going to leave it this evening. Thank you very much for your time. Advocate Tembeka Mugaitobi has written 2 books on this subject, reflecting, of course, tonight on the debate that took place in Parliament earlier, where the ANC, which had sponsored the bill, actually lost because it couldn't get the requisite 2/3 majority to pass it. After the break, the Public Service Commission today published its latest quarterly edition of a bulletin they call the Pulse of the Public Service. Among the issues the watchdog body is bringing to the attention of both the public and the state, lifestyle audits. Are we finally going to see the day public servants, politicians undergo lifestyle audits in South Africa? Our guest is Somadoda Figeni. That's up next. Don't go away. Welcome back. This is the Watchdog. The Public Service Commission today published its latest edition of their quarterly bulletin they call the Pulse of the Public Service. Now, among the issues this particular bulletin is bringing to our attention this time around is the issue of lifestyle audits. According to timelines that the Public Service Department and Ministry set for itself, was that in February next year, these lifestyle audits are finally going to begin. It's something South Africans have been talking about for a very long time. Dr. Somadoda Figeni is a public service commissioner and he joins us now. Good evening, Dr. Figeni. Thanks very much for your time. How appropriate that today you had to talk about this. I was watching earlier the Special Investigations Unit briefing Parliament about, PPE investigations. We're talking over 14 billion rands that they had been investigating. They were giving an update. And among the things they found was this whole group of public servants, who had helped themselves to the kitty or who had done irregular things, facilitating, deals or tenders for people who were simply put undeserving. Are we finally going to see these lifestyle audits happening in February as promised?
It is the case that we're going to see the lifestyle audits happening in February after consultations and some training of people to introduce them and make sure that they take effect. But it will take heads of departments, it will take the political will of leadership, and it will take everyone else involved, including those in the forensic space and the intelligence, as well as the financial sector, working together to make sure that we finally implement lifestyle audit as one of the toolkits of fighting this pandemic and cancerous corruption in the country.
Yesterday we had here on the program the National Director of Public Prosecutions, who 3 years after she was appointed, told us last night that, yes, she knew that the job was not going to be easy, but she didn't think that it was going to be this difficult, or as difficult as it has been. With her, of course, having very little, if anything, to show for the 3 years that she has been at the helm of that organization. And one wonders whether, with all the training that you have spoken about, the will, certainly from statements that have been made by ministers and those in charge of this process, what are they saying? How easy or difficult do they think it's going to be to implement this?
Well, if you see the patronage networks and corruption, which is quite endemic, nothing in fighting and pushing back this scourge is going to be easy, because it had permeated various levels. Despite well-meaning good public servants out there and well-meaning leaders, those who are determined to steal, to loot, are quite organized. So it will take the different sector fighting corruption to be equally organized and to know that this is a war that the country is going into, and it should be taken as such. And we should leave nothing to chance. But again, it will take professionalization of public service, because the weakening of public service was when people were put in place for loyalty instead of competence, and instead of loyalty into a patriotic duty of a country. And that in itself is an added tool to that, with the added powers to the AG and increased vigilance from the SIU and various other organs of the state. So it will take everybody playing their part, including the public, reporting those issues of lifestyle which sometimes may not be covered. When you see a person having a modest salary but living a lavish lifestyle that is way beyond what they can manage. And again, we emphasize in this report that the issue is not to criminalize being wealthy, but it is simply to connect the dots and be able to explain. And that would also assist SARS, where people would have to pay their dues as well.
And of course, I mean, the point you make there that is in your report is that, that said, it needs to be noted that the majority of public servants are honest and people of integrity, and so we shouldn't paint them with the same brush.
Certainly, that is the case. The only problem is that that general public may not necessarily, be corrupt, but the few who are corrupt are the ones who blemish and damage the reputation of public service. It's the same issue where you say, when a one tree falls, it makes such a loud noise. When the whole forest is growing, you hardly ever notice any sound. So this is the case, but the key issue here is to make sure that even those cases, be they few and far between, they have such a damaging impact in the entire system. Therefore, every effort should not be spared in trying to fight this scourge of corruption. The poor are the ones who suffer the most when you have corruption, especially in the public service.
Now, another issue you're dealing with in your report, before I let you go, is the non-payment of service providers. I remember not too long ago, a list was published. I think it came from Treasury, where some of these provinces were really, I think it was only the Western Cape, if I'm not mistaken, that had a good record of paying its service providers. And this is important because you're talking also about very small, businesses, that rely, on the little that they're able to make off government departments and institutions, and they get destroyed because government doesn't pay on time. And a promise was made that this issue is going to be addressed. Is there any progress being made in that regard?
There is some progress, but rather incremental, as our report shows, small in a sense to being insignificant. And that is why this matter ought to be prioritized for a number of reasons. The first one, the destruction of the small and medium enterprise or businesses. It's the very same sector. If you look at most countries, 80, 70 to 90% of what drives their economies are these small businesses, and they employ a bigger number than your big businesses. And in this country, if you want an inclusive economy, blacks who mainly had been excluded historically, it is the chance of their entry point into being sustainable businesses. Now, non-payment of them lead to many of these closing, and it leads to many people being fired from their businesses. And government cannot be the primary cause of that. That is why the issue of non-payment of service providers where they have provided services and they have provided proof is, one of the things that Public Service Commission, working with other related departments, is doing everything to make sure that there is compliance to this effect. In fact, we would say even the performance of provinces and the performance of departments, this ought to be one of the key indicators when the leaders are being assessed to see how they are performing because of its implications and the impact, as I've mentioned.
Dr. Figen, that's where we're going to leave it this evening. Thank you very much for your time. He is a Public Service Commissioner. Today, they published their latest quarterly edition of a bulletin they call The Pulse of the Public Service. And among the issues that they were talking about today is the issue of lifestyle audits, which finally are going to start in February. A very important exercise because we have seen how public servants who earn only this much but get to enjoy a life worth this much. Extravagant lifestyles from monies they get from where? Your guess is as good as mine. We're going to take a quick ad break. After the break, we talk about vaccinations at your place of work or in public places. An all-important agreement has apparently been reached. We get the details from representatives of labor, business, civil society, and the government. The all-important National Economic Development and Labour held its annual meeting today, where the issue of mandatory vaccination took center stage. But can access to workplaces, public venues, gatherings and events be restricted to vaccinated people only? Well, it's been a controversial issue whose constitutionality even has been questioned. Now, according to NEDLEC's executive director, business, labor, civil society and government have now reached an agreement on this matter.
The social partners have agreed, that is organised business, labour and community, that to promote vaccinations and protect the country from lockdowns, workplaces should require employees to be vaccinated to enable occupational health and safety, and that there needs to be access restricted to certain venues, events and gatherings only to vaccinated people. That message has been conveyed to the NAT joints for further deliberation within government.
Well, reports coming from the same gathering, however, say Beki Nchalinchali, who is COSATU's General Secretary, apparently told the summit that his Labour Federation was not in favour of mandatory vaccination. Labour Minister Thulas Nxesi told the same summit that government was working to finalise consultations on the matter, as you heard Lisa Seftel saying there. Now, to try and get more clarity, and we invited representatives from each of the NEDLAC constituencies. Temingose Mkhalipi is the acting DDG, Labour Policy and Industrial Relations at the Department of Labour. Kaskovadia is the CEO of Business Unity South Africa. Tulani Chefuta is a convener of the NEDLAC community constituency. COSATU, we had been asking the whole day and we were promised, but nothing has come of that promise up to this moment. Good evening, gentlemen. Thanks very much for your time. Kaskovadia, I mean, if I may start with you, Kas, I mean, among the arguments businesses are advancing in support of mandatory vaccination is that lockdowns we have realized, which we have relied on perhaps heavily, I mean, in the past, aren't good for business.
Yeah, so what we've said, and we've taken the view that all the science shows that the most effective weapon we have against the virus is to vaccinate as many people as quickly as possible and to continue with non-medical protocols like masking and so on. We also believe that the most effective way of avoiding a hard lockdown is also to vaccinate as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. So there's both an economic and health reason for this. The position we have taken is that the current OHS directives enable employers to act in a way that they ensure that their workplaces are such that all employees are protected in their workplaces. And so you've got the Discoveries of this world, the Old Mutuals of this world, the Anglos of this world, who have all indicated that they will use the directives and have started using the directives to ensure that their workplaces are safe. Now, what we are saying is that if you want to get back to some semblance of normality, if you want to participate in activities where you come into contact with other people, then you must vaccinate. If you show a health reason not to vaccinate, that's fine, then the employer will look at that. But if for any other reason you choose not to vaccinate, then to enter those places, you either vaccinate or employers are saying you produce a negative test on an ongoing basis. And this is to protect society. This is to protect workers and others in places where people are mixing who have vaccinated. And so it's not a question of forcing people to vaccinate. It's a question of saying, if you want to get involved in some types of activities, if you want to go to work, you must vaccinate so that we're protecting all those who have vaccinated and we are protecting society at large. That's what we're talking about. Let's move away from this whole debate about the term mandatory and so on. What we're saying is that you have a choice not to vaccinate, but then there are certain consequences to that choice. And that's what we are saying. Thank you.
Tulani Chefuta, I guess that's the reason, as the community constituents at NEDLAC, you have also thrown your weight behind this proposition.
Well, thank you and good evening, Vuyo, and all the viewers of this program. Our view as the community constituency and also broadly canvassed with a broad sector of civil society organizations across the country is actually that we continue to miss an opportunity of investing on public education and awareness such that the existing protocol of voluntary vaccination is something that people would wake up and seize any day. We believe that social mobilization is one of the biggest interventions that must be mounted in order to bring about behavioral change. Forcing people without the proper education will just render them as robots. We believe that we can no longer afford, even with the different other waves of COVID-19 that will be coming. We genuinely don't believe that we can anymore afford going to lock ourselves down in our small little corners. But if we invest in social mobilization to bring about behavioral change, we are empowering people with the necessary life skills in order for them to be able to coexist with the virus and even maneuver their lives in the different aspects of life, be it in the household, be it in the communities and other community activities, be it in the labor market or any other space where we find people. And it is only through those investments that we will be able to have a citizenship that is taking ownership of what it has to do without being forced in any way. And so we believe that either than the other existing medical interventions, social interventions like public education and awareness, social mobilization leading to behavioral change is what we must begin to invest more on, because people need to change their behaviors essentially, whether vaccinated or not vaccinated. And upon encouraging vaccination, then you can begin to have instances where those who have vaccinated begin to see the benefits of vaccination with immediate effect. Currently, we do not see that. I am fully vaccinated, for example, but still, I do not draw a benefit of going to watch my favorite team playing soccer on the field, just like an unvaccinated person does. And so that is the view that civil society and the community constituency is driving on the issue. Thank you very much.
Thembinkosi, why would the government still be consulting then if, as the minister suggested today, if, as Lisa Seftel was saying, there is already an agreement reached at NEDLEC?
But you must remember, Vuyo, that with government deal with wider stakeholders that might not be also at NEDLEC. You've got to give also those stakeholders an opportunity to have a view on this issue. Therefore, at NEDLEC, there is an agreement. In the labor market, there's no issue about this issue because the directive, OHF directive, already give this in the labor market. Now you need to have the wider society that interact with organizations in this issue. Therefore, in order for us to have a policy or a directive that is clear, that is supported by the majority of the people that might not be players in the labor market, but are clients to the players in the labor market. Therefore, it is important for government does that wider consultation, not only with NEDLEC stakeholders. As you would know, that NEDLEC does not represent all the organizations that will be affected by whatever decision that government has taken. Now, the process, as business has indicated, the decision that is agreed at NEDLEC is put through the net joint process. From the net joint process, it goes to the ministerial committee and then to cabinet. That's how these decisions are taken. Thank you.
How much, from what you know or you've heard or seen, how much resistance has there been to, for example, the directives that Kes was referring to earlier?
Well, the directive that Kes was referring to earlier already give employers the right to determine their own policy on whether workers who are not vaccinated should be able to come in. If a company is consulted, has got a policy that regulates that space, there's nothing else that they need to do. All these companies that you were talking about, the MTNs, the others that have made policy decisions, those policy decisions are applicable. Therefore, they don't need to wait for this consultation. What is important with the consultation that it goes beyond the labor market. As I've said, it goes, if you look at companies, sectors like restaurant, events management. It's not only about workers working there. There's a public that is coming in. And if the public is allowed to come in that is vaccinated, that can show that they're vaccinated, then you've got an ability of opening up those markets further than the situation as it is now. Therefore, in the labor market, the issues are clear. The policy is clear. The directive is clear. It's up to companies to develop those policies as just like the other companies have done and implement them. When they develop them, implement them, workers who are refusing vaccination for a reason that is not reasonable, the consequences of those, if there is a policy, might be them losing their jobs, not being forced to vaccinate, but the consequence could them be losing their jobs on the basis that they've got no valid reason for refusing to vaccinate. That's in the labor market. But then if you want to extend that to people who are not necessarily employees of the companies, but people who are customers in this, as I've said, like restaurant, people who are going into a restaurant to buy food, who are going into pubs, and all of those kind of establishments. They are not workers of those establishments, but they are customers. Should a restaurant be allowed to say, well, you can only come here if you've been vaccinated, because if you have not, you've got the risk of affecting other people. And that's what has been agreed at NETLEC, to move forward, to take a further step on the directives that we had and amend the directive in such a way that they are able to cater for those eventualities. But the final decision that is made on this issue will be a decision made by cabinet, as you know how that's how the process works. Thank you.
Okay, Kes, he's left already.
No, I'm here.
Kes, are you still there? Oh, okay. I know I've got to release you. Just two quick ones from me, for you. One is that I understand business wants this matter ventilated at the Constitutional Court for probably a declaratory order. So I wanted to ask you about that, but I also want to ask you just overall, because all of this is about, balancing, livelihoods and life. Just on the broader economic recovery issues, are you together? Have you found one another? And can we look forward to, February, whether it's when the president gives his State of the Nation address and subsequently the Minister of Finance gets to table the budget? Can we say that from the conversations you've had throughout the year, we are going in a recognizable direction come next year?
Okay, so let me first just talk about this Constitutional Court issue, and I do need to clear this up. BUSA has at no time said we are going to the Constitutional Court. What we have said is that we are looking at the possibility of applying to the High Court for a declaratory order to bring about some certainty in this debate. We have interacted with advocates. We've had a meeting with senior counsel, but given the time of year, people going on leave, we're doing work on this. Affidavits are being prepared, and senior counsel will look at these early in the new year. And if senior counsel is of the view that we should go for a declaratory order, then we will do so.
Okay.
We have not indicated in any way that we are going to the Constitutional Court.
Okay.
The second issue on economic recovery, I think that I don't think we found each other. I think that we as BUSA have been consistently saying that the critical levers to unblock investment and to put us onto the path to economic growth lie with government. The structural reforms that need to be made in the economy lie with government. And we believe that government needs to take the lead in that, needs to create an environment for investment so that investors are confident to invest in our country, in job-creating businesses, and then business can work with government and other social partners to actually build an inclusive economy. But government needs to take the lead in that.
Thank you very much for your time. Sorry for holding you for much longer than we had agreed. Cascovadia, who is the CEO of Business Unity South Africa. But my other guests, Temingosi and Tulani, of course, do stay on. I'm going to start with you, Tulani, just from like reflecting on, the year. How would you describe the conversations, especially confronted as we are by the challenge of the pandemic, and as the past two we have seen, in the past 2 quarters? I mean, we are now looking at record high levels of unemployment. The pandemic has only made the situation worse. We were in a bad space long before the pandemic, actually. From the conversations you've been having at NEDLAC, do you have a sense that next year will be better, or probably be better than the past year and last year?
Well, we think that the year on which our annual summit of NEDLAC was reporting on now started off on a very, very, very bad footing, because it is the time around which the first cases of COVID-19 were reported, lockdown being introduced. And that was taking place against the backdrop of the fact that already our economic indicators had their heads down. And so it only exacerbated the fault lines that we already had. And if anything, we believe that COVID-19 just laid bare things that were already fault lines in our society. Inequalities have been just laid bare. Unemployment, as it has been exacerbating, like you were mentioning, Vuyo. And so what has happened, though, is that NEDLAC has been able to be positioned to be an institution that uses social dialogue amongst social partners in order to find solutions to the challenges of our society. And with that being said, we know that we can no longer depend on government to do things for our communities. We have been arguing that for all the challenges that we have, we must begin to leverage the social capital that is also residing in communities. And the discussion even around the economic reconstruction and recovery plan are discussions that we have been able to find each other on. But our view as civil society is that whilst we may be building the confidence of the investors, we must equally on the other side build the confidence of the people generally, such that people can identify with this economic recovery and reconstruction plan, that if implemented and implemented to the latter, it can improve the lives of the people. We believe that the sectors that have been targeted in that economic reconstruction and recovery plan are sectors that are very strategic in their nature. Those are sectors that are labor intensive, like agriculture, infrastructure, tourism, and so on. But our view is that these are some of the sectors that we have been reciting year in, year out, as sectors that are labor intensive, as sectors that if we invest on, are sectors that can generate employment, are sectors that can boost our investments, are sectors that can also bring about growth on our economy. But our view as the community constituency is that we must begin to do things differently. If you take the example of infrastructure development, just as an example, we believe that communities can no longer only have a relationship of being consumers with the infrastructure. Communities must be empowered with skills and be positioned to be agents of delivery of the very same infrastructure, such that they do not just wait and say, we will wait until the delivery of the infrastructure is done and completed, and then we consume that infrastructure. Okay. Those are some of the reasons why communities begin to ban one piece of infrastructure when they are not happy about the other, because they have no relationship that is beyond just being consumers of that infrastructure.
Okay. Temingosi, what has been, is the department tasked with, dealing with our employment, unemployment issues. What is your sense? What is your sense of where we are, and whether the next year will be better, than the one we are coming out of, which has seen these record high levels of unemployment?
Well, the analysts are telling us that the reason employment has dropped in this last quarter by 1.5 is because of the unrest that took place in KZN and Gauteng. And there's no doubt that even with the effect of COVID, our economy is going to take a long time for us to recover, to reach the level that we were before COVID. That's the first.
Which wasn't a great level. We were already in a very bad space, before COVID.
No, I agree, I'll take that. But the issue is that you cannot expect to move beyond where you were. You've got to reach where you were first before you even go beyond that. There's no doubt that this economy has got to do more than that. For us to absorb the numbers of unemployed in this economy has got to grow far faster and higher than it is. There's no doubt about that. But we can't close our eyes with what has happened with COVID, with what has happened with the unrest that has taken place. And as communities indicated, the discussion that are taking place both at NEDLEC and in government about the changes that need to take place in the energy sector, in infrastructure investment, and all others. We need all parties to come in. When government make this decision that, now business can use up to 100 kilowatt of power, of energy, would want to see a number of companies using that. We have not seen that at this stage, the effect of that liberalization that has taken place. The same would apply with the infrastructure investment that is taking place. When government announce opportunities, you'd want business to come in numbers and use those opportunities. That's the only way that you're going to be able to grow this economy. It's not going to be government creating the employment. It's going to be business that create employment. Government has got to create the environment that enable it. And the government has started with that environment. The issue is, it's just a pity that business is not here. They should have also been talking on this issue. When the environment is created for them to come and bring the money, bring the investment, are we going to see that investment flowing in so that jobs can be created? But if we think that government is going to create jobs, it ain't going to happen, because government hasn't got the capacity, hasn't got the money to do that. But government can lay out the foundation that enable business to be able to operate. And that's what we're concentrating on. Thank you.
Special thanks to both of you, gentlemen. Thembinkosi Mkhaliphi, who's the acting DDG, Labour Policy and Industrial Relations at the Department of Labour, and Thulani Chefuta, who represented the NEDLEC community constituency this evening. Our guest who had to leave, Casco Vadia, who is the CEO of Business Unity South Africa. And that's our show for this evening. Thanks very much for watching. Do join us again tomorrow evening, 8 p.m. sharp. Have a good night.